for both of his acts, they sense that they're part of something.
You're like, listen,
special
you want to
here.
marry my daughter? You hunt this buck. You shoot another one, you're gone. You're done. I'll start this one by I walked in on Ian dropping a deuce.
Well, listen, I mean, at the end of the day.
Well, he's pulling it. What were you doing? Pulling your pants up?
He scared the crap out of me. I knew he was coming, and I was like, I gotta stop. I gotta finish fast.
He goes, well, hold up.
It's too late.
Well, hold up.
Off?
You know those doors have locks on them.
I know, and I thought about how I forgot to lock it.
It's like a prison in here.
Have you ever seen, is it Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers? Where he's like, why don't you just knock? Just knock, bro. The kindergarten teacher or whatever.
So you just burst in there?
Yeah, only one of the doors was closed. So I was like, he's not going to come in the door that I'm
no,
in,
he
right?
has his. You were in the far one, though,
I was,
right?
yeah.
Jared has dictated that as his shitter.
Has better.
I was like, the door's closed on this one, the door's not closed on that one, so I should be fine. I don't need to get up and.
I heard it. I wasn't sure if I should like say something. I heard like, whoa.
He goes, oh, hold up. I was like, whoa. Yeah, it was fine. We played it off.
That's good.
It's just like a big deer camp in here. Typically in deer camp, the door's just open and you're shitting.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
And we're back. HUNTR Podcast, episode 31, I believe. 31.
Sounds right.
Yeah. Well, we just returned from our binger trip in the Midwest, Indiana and Illinois, a little bit of Missouri, but not for hunting purposes necessarily. It was hot.
Yeah, covered some ground. It was hot. It was more humid than. It's not the heat that'll get you; it's the humidity.
Yeah, I lost several pounds a day, I believe, in water weight.
I didn't lose any weight. I did come back and weighed myself.
Oh, we ate a lot of food though, and that might help. Supplement that.
Yeah, we found a solid subjoint down there.
I may have lost pounds of blood from the mosquitoes and chiggers as well. I don't know.
It's very possible. Yeah, if we lost weight, it was blood getting sucked.
I keep telling people, you know what's kind of funny, and like obviously we're not hiding anything here. We were talking at a real estate agency the other day, and when I brought up like, oh, we're in Southern Illinois, I brought up Union, which I like. I think you do too in terms of the feel of that. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then I bring up Pulaski, which is our southern lease, and they're like, oh yeah, like that's a great county.
Oh really?
And it's like, oh really? Like I mean,
Pulaski's where Hobart's at.
Yep.
Yeah. It does feel.
I mean, we saw a giant. We saw probably a 160s for sure.
Yeah. There's just a lot. It's just a lot more habitat down there. It's thicker country, not as big a timber, more early successional. Like you can. They've done some tree plantings in the early '90s and
blocks
stuff.
of timber, and then hundreds of acres of ag around them. We did get that buck last night. I don't know if it looks like a big 7, but big frame on them.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize initially looking at those pictures. So there's two. It looks like 2 mature bucks there. One's that big 7, like a 140-inch 7-point, and whatever that other thing is,
just non-typical, weird. Almost looks like an antlered doe.
Not like a real big one either.
He's got on that one side, there's just like tines coming out of his base. I don't understand.
Not real attractive.
No. Did go and hit the scrape though.
Probably needs an arrow, but
hit the mock scrape.
Yeah.
So,
it almost looked like they were a little hesitant. Didn't it seem that way? Like they were kind of like the one was standing back. Yeah. The 7-point went and hit it too, though.
Did he?
The picture you sent me, the 7-point is in the scrape.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. And again, we're just impatient, I guess. But like we set a lot of these cameras up for October, November. And most of those cameras, we have not gotten buck pictures. We've not gotten any pictures on some of them.
Yeah, some I'm surprised on. Like the refuge over there. Like we bumped a big bachelor group of bucks with looked like 2 shooters right into
250 yards from there.
Right into. I'll guarantee they ran out of that trail that we ended up putting the camera on, and we just haven't seen anything.
It's
on
Giant Creek crossing. You could clearly see the deer crossing.
We did walk on it.
Yeah, maybe we just boogered it a little bit. I guess. I don't know. I mean, the fact is again, like as much as
especially due to Hobart's, like we know that we bumped that buck off of there.
It's a secluded back bean field.
It's 150 yards down a line of bean field. Like he's there.
I truly think it's an accurate representation of like those deer just aren't moving.
Yeah,
they're just here to here,
especially out there. I just think there's so much habitat. That's what's weird about like out here in Pennsylvania. If you find a good piece of ground or some good looking habitat, more than likely there's going to be some deer held up in it. You're going to find signs.
Well, and place up on the mountain. I mean, I've got 20 different bucks on camera right now.
But if you go out to the Midwest, like Illinois, Kansas, Iowa, the whole state is that. And so there can't possibly be deer in every spot. So you really do have to look for sign that they're there, or sightings, to actually hone in on which pieces are worth looking at.
I think really it's just going to come down to, I feel comfortable with everything we put out. I mean, we put a lot of boots on the ground. It's going to come down to just getting those deer to expand their home ranges. Right now we're talking, tens of acres of home range. Pretty soon we'll be talking hundreds of acres of home range. And that's what it's going to come down to, is just they're not moving right now. And so if you're not in their direct path from their bed to the feeding area, you're just not going to get them on camera. And at some point they will start to break out of that phase. And when they do, that's when you're probably going to start getting them on camera. So yeah, I mean, it was a great trip. Got some cameras hung, got some stands hung.
Dude, found a big buck in Indiana.
Yeah.
Stud.
A stud, which I've been waiting for him to show back up, because there's multiple bucks. Like
couple 2-year-olds.
This was a lease that we kind of, I won't say wrote off, but it was just like, we did have a camera stolen, like the day after we put one up in shed season.
It's a small track and it's right outside of town. So,
and I think somebody saw our car back in the corner of this field where we were setting the camera up, because it was almost dark, or it was dark.
Probably the landowner.
Yeah,
we're thinking
next door, and then he came in the next day and swiped that camera, but
snagged it.
Yeah, we put 2 cameras.
That's
out.
the fastest I've ever had a camera stolen.
Well, that's why I
know of.
He had to have seen us, because he didn't even get his picture taken by the camera.
It was like within 12 hours of putting the camera up.
So we put these new cameras up, and we've got one spot called Southern Gap. And
that's why you don't buy $700 trail cameras.
It is, yeah. I mean, it sucks that we lost it, but it's like, less than $200 investment.
Yeah.
This new place that we've got in Indiana has been just constantly. There's 2 probably 3-year-old bucks that have been moving through there, maybe 2, hard to say.
Yeah.
And then one really nice shooter 8-point in there.
Probably still just a 4-year-old, but
Yeah,
we're shooting 4-year-olds. So
yeah, that's a stud. And those deer have just been moving through there. So yeah, it's been we've got a shooter on cam there. It's just the activity right now. We've definitely boogered some stuff in Illinois. I think we probably have boogered some stuff even in our Ohio lease. Those bucks just don't. There's the same 2 bucks that we're seeing over and over and over again, and other than that, not much. Maybe 3 bucks, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and it's early. It's just now August. We're out of July. I feel like we talked about July forever.
We're doing we're doing
out.
pretty good as far as since the last podcast we did, we've got several shooters starting to show up. Over on my farm, I've got that one nice 8 with kickers on his twos. Who I don't necessarily know who that is, but he's
definitely a good one.
He's plenty mature. I've got 2 other tight rack deals. We've got this buck in Indiana for sure shooter. We saw several shooters in Illinois, probably 3 or 4.
I think that's a good point, man. Again, we're camera fanatics on this side, and we've got. I looked at my thing the other day. I've got like 30.
Oh, we got the freaking
cams.
Not a giant, but I mean a real nice buck over on Jed's.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big buck.
A high property. I've got some
probably
permission
150s.
on. Yeah. Dude, Dale. See, Dale's like me. He's like, that's 160 plus for sure. And I was like, I do think he's high 150s at least. I wouldn't be surprised if he. I'll be
interested to see where he comes out at. I bet I was thinking like 152, 153.
Yeah.
Just because of those small 4s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very weak 4s for sure. Barely.
I think an interesting part. We've got all these
crazy
cameras
brow
out.
tines. Though.
He does have crazy.
We'll throw a picture up online at some point.
But I think that when we were in Illinois, we saw half dozen shooters probably. Mm-hmm. None of them on camera, all close to cameras.
Yep.
But it was driving bean fields in the evening that we saw these.
Yeah, dude. It's kind of eye-opening at my farm. All those bucks, the shooters that I know, they're all bedding right on the bean field, like right on the edge of it. They're staying right there. And I've got a camera 100 yards away that I don't get pictures.
Just not getting them. Yeah. I mean, we've got a real solid 10 on our Union County lease and an 8. Yeah. They're both shooters that are 150 yards from our camera, have been. Not a picture of them.
Yeah.
They're literally here to here to here. So yeah, it's going to be patient. I mean, I say that mainly so that anybody else that's kind of experiencing that stuff doesn't get too discouraged about it. It's still summertime and deer just aren't moving a lot. It's hot. It's humid. They got food right there and there's no pressure.
I will say, super impressed with the buck fever. Like not just saying that either. Like within the first day or two, we've got some mature does coming in to check these places out.
Heads right up in the licking
that
branches.
big buck we've got on Indiana is coming in and checking that out. I'm a little skeptical of like the dirt stuff. I just don't know how big of a role that has. We peed in every scrape we put in anyway. So something's working, but I really think the
licking branch,
branch, whatever scent that is, it's the
branch action.
What do they call that? Branch action. So that's the preseason stuff, and they've got some more.
Yeah, which is the forehead gland one.
Some more intense stuff, I suppose,
for
during the season. But they're clearly interested in that.
I mean, we haven't seen that big buck again. It drew him out in 2 days. He checked it out and was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then back.
Also, great discovery of not an invention, but we figured out this little hand rake that I brought to Illinois. Worked amazingly for putting in scripts, not only for the ground aspect, which is what I had planned on, but also for
licking branch.
Licking branch. So what I was doing, and I think it's the way to do it.
The old hunter scrape rake.
Yeah. Well, we'll pull down a big branch. I'll get it just to where it needs to be. It's like eye level, and I would twist a bunch of branches around each other, so it's just a dense glob of branches hanging right there, and then just rake the crap out of it so that it strips it of leaves and everything. And I think it gets some scent too because it's tearing some of the bark off. And then we spray it up with that branch action, and it's working good,
man. Yeah. So it'll be interesting. Next few weeks will be. I mean, we're in it at this point. We're off and running.
Well, dude, it's like 60 degrees out. It's starting to feel.
I would have killed one this morning, probably.
Starting to feel a little fallish.
Yeah, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got a pretty cool guest today. A guy that I know we've known from the work side with Stone Row Media for a while, but I've watched him, on YouTube series. And first of all, just a really, really intelligent guy, Tom James, Base Camp Country National Sales Manager. And Tom's got background. You may have seen him with Management Advantage. You probably have seen him from Base Camp Country. The guy it lives for deer hunting, managing farms, real estate. Just a good guy and a wealth of knowledge, especially when it comes to like that Midwest deer hunting.
He came from Whitetail Properties, right? Didn't he?
Originally was Whitetail Properties, Illinois, I think.
Okay, and so now he's working for the real estate division of Base Camp Leasing, which most people are familiar with.
Yep.
And he's the national sales manager over there.
And that's called Base Camp Country Real Estate.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think Tom's been there. We were just talking about it 2.5 years, maybe 3 years at the most.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a wealth of knowledge. Good guy, great reputation. I know has a extreme passion for managing whitetails on his properties.
Well, speaking of scrapes, dude, this guy, I think he's got a trapping background. He's extremely knowledgeable about scrapes and mock scrapes. So we'll have to pick his brain on that.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Let's bring Tom in.
Hey.
There he is.
Good morning, guys.
We caught you.
We got you.
Yeah, writing some notes down, doing some business. Sorry.
Holy crap! That European buck behind. I didn't realize when we first had. Did you move that there just now?
Hey, magic.
I was like, wait a minute. I would have noticed that
He's
the first time.
How do I dose this up just a notch? Huh?
Where is that buck from?
I didn't realize it, but my pile of junk was in the shot. So I texted Morgan. I said, "Hey, come here. Can you pull this pile of crap out from behind me? And by the way, why don't you just stick my dead head back?"
Yeah, throw that 180 over here real quick.
That's a good one. That's a giant.
It's actually a 230.
Do it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a found dead deer here in a farmer friend of mine found that back in the I'd say probably around 2001 or 2.
Wow.
Dude, those will get you. Those non-typicals, they're either 180 or they're 220.
Yeah.
Seeing that almost makes me consider the fact that buck that they killed off our Ohio lease may have been that it was an official. I don't know what
the 50-cent buck.
Yeah, I don't know what the club was that scored it.
It was Buckmasters.
Buckmasters. They scored that thing at like 219 or something. I have the score sheet. Maybe it looks kind of like that deer there.
They are deceiving. 150, 160 frame, and then boom.
That's exactly right. This deer has, I think, 28 scoreable additional non-typical points that measure 58 inches.
Wow.
There you go.
They add up.
Those add up. And I mean, they're all over the place. You really start spinning them around and look in the backside. There's just stickers everywhere.
That's crazy.
That was found on a property that you hunt, Tom, or?
No. And actually it's kind of a suburban area. My friend that I went to high school with farms a lot of little small fields around some subdivisions and things like that. And that deer was presumably hit by a car and died in the middle of a cornfield, because when he was shelling his corn, he found it. And I mean, he doesn't have a scratch on the antlers or anything like that, but it was close to a pretty busy road.
Wow. How did you end up with it? He's like, here, I don't want it.
Well, he didn't realize what he had. He called me. He said, hey, I know you guys get pretty excited about a 10-pointer. And he said, I've got this one that I kind of lose track of counting. Would you like to come down here and look at it and maybe tell me what it scores? So I did. When I went down there to see it, he had it laying out in his front yard. And I said, man, you can't do that. Somebody's going to run off with that thing. So I scored it. And when I called him back, I said, man, you have no idea here. And at the time, we were just launching the Furminator, and I was kind of in the process of trying to create a graphic or a logo for the company, and the light bulb went off, and I asked him if he would sell it to me. And he said, well, I was going to mount it, and stick it out in the garage. My wife won't let me have it in the house. So
it's a 230-inch buck.
Because he ended up having me write a check to his church.
Oh, that's cool.
He donated the money to his church, and then my wife and I bought the antlers, and then we use a negative image of the antlers, like a reverse, black and white image of Modern Habitat Solutions, the Furminator, and that was the logo of the unit when it first came out.
Dang, that's crazy, man. Cool story.
That's awesome. So what did you use the negative for?
The logo.
We just took the image.
Oh, so that is the logo of the Furminator or the original company?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
When we started, I wanted an umbrella company, because at the time I was still doing consulting and seed sales and all that stuff too. So Modern Habitat Solutions was the name of my company that we started. There's a lot of companies that kind of sound similar to that now, but it was, way back in 2002. Yeah. And
I didn't realize that. So is that an implement that your company designed and came out with, the Furminator?
Yeah, that was mine.
I have one of those.
I developed that product and later sold it to Renew's Outdoor Equipment in Georgia.
That's the name I'm familiar with. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I have a question for you. I realize this probably you're not concerned with it anymore, but the only issue that I have with my Furminator is I didn't buy it with a seed agitator, and so I don't really use the cedar part. Does it come with one of those? Like, can you buy an agitator to put on those?
You can, but actually, in all the years that I've used them, and I still have one, of course, myself today, I prefer to not have the agitator in it.
Okay.
And for the strict reason of, I like to be able to get down to the bottom of the seed box between seed changes. If I want to go to a different size seed, changing varieties or what have you, it's just easy to open up the seed bushings and be able to vacuum out the bottom of the box. With the seed agitator in place, you can't get underneath that to really, truly clean it out.
All right.
And as you know how that unit functions, when you close the metering system, those bushings have to close. And if there's any seed pinched in between those bushings, you're not effectively getting it down regulated as small as you want to. But it does all that. Really, the reason for the agitator was if guys were putting in 2 or 3 extreme different seed sizes, and most of your fall blends that have brassicas and cereal grains and annual clovers or what have you, those varieties, if you'll set it for the largest seed in that mix,
you're
gold. You're good. I mean,
so the reason that I even bring it up is that the issue that I have with mine is because the bottom of this, what is called a seed box, is flat, and there's essentially holes along the side of it. Is I'll get seed that won't find those holes. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially the small, the brassica stuff. And so the one year that we did use it for seeding, the plots did turn out very well. So, I mean, it obviously does what it's supposed to do. But I had to ride on the back grate of the Furminator while my dad was driving and, like, agitate all the seed or push it into those holes myself to get it to go down. Which is only a problem once you're at the very bottom, or you're doing
I was going to say, that's the common issue when you're at the bottom of the box.
Or I'm doing a 1/4 acre plot, and it's like not a lot of seed to begin with,
Correct, yeah. And especially if you have a 6 or an 8 foot unit where a 1/4 acre bag.
We've got a 7.
Lost in the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So that's, you did it the way that I do it is I have a buddy right on the back when we're down to the bottom.
Yeah.
But yeah. In an ideal setting or an ideal world, you have enough seed in there to keep the seed meters fed properly. There was a lot of talk right at the end of when I owned it of creating a drop-in valley pan that
Yep.
would have
I was
seats out.
gonna build one myself, like
Yeah.
before I decided. So now I just use a bag seat, and I'm just pretty comfortable with. I
Mhm.
know how much seat I'm putting out and stuff. But initially, I was like, man, I should just design some kind of a funnel that just fits around the edge of this thing that just makes all the seed go down in there.
Really simple prospect. You just punch the holes out for the oval openings, and you have basically ridges in between the openings where the seed by gravity wants
Yeah.
to fall towards the centers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There you
those guys will have that. I promise you.
Okay.
There you go.
That's cool. I didn't realize that you
Well,
hit
I mean,
on that
it's
company.
one of those things too. I mean, we talk about food plots, and you look at that as a complete system or piece of equipment. You know, there's still plenty of people who don't call to pack. You know, anything that they do. And,
It is a great implement.
you know, yeah.
I've one other bone to pick, but there's a solution for it. But so it's worked. Initially, we started off with a non-hydraulic top link,
Top link, yeah.
and that didn't last very long.
Just trying to crank down the pressure on the disc.
Well, you have to go back and forth from the disc to the call packer so frequently, and I was like, it's way too much work to do this. Like you're just burning out your forearms every time. So we got that hydraulic top link, and it totally solved it. I mean, it's awesome. We use that for every food plot we put in. I'm planting it all the way from 1/8 acre, whatever Clover plots to I put a 4-acre bean field in this year with it.
Awesome. Yeah, you're right. The ability to go from heavily forward tilting for heavy disking to lean it back to do a combination of the two, or all the way back on the cultipacker where it's packing by itself. And just to be able to do that from the tractor seat versus jumping off. And as you know, depending on the tractor too, a lot of them have a larger turnbuckle with some nice handles on them, and it makes it a little bit more comfortable.
Okay.
I would always take on the mechanical ones, I would get a big open end, like a crescent wrench, and put the
100%.
the hole on the end of the handle,
Yep.
and use it as a leverage to spin that thing around. The other trick is too, if you can back it up on a slight embankment, where
Take the weight off
packers are a little bit on a rise, and then you set it down in the front. You can actually stand there by the fender of your tractor and feathering your lift arm, or you know what I'm trying to say, the control for your lift. You can take the pressure off of it as you turn it down, bump it down a little bit more, turn it so as the machine is falling by gravity, take up that slack in the top link. I'm telling you guys stuff that probably doesn't mean much to anybody, but
that's all right.
tricks you learn over the years.
No, it's perfect. I mean, dude, there's a lot of these little food plotting tricks, especially with the implements that it took me
just
5-6 years to figure out this stuff.
Yeah.
We almost sold one to Bob the other day. So there's a landowner that we're leasing from through Base Camp Leasing in Ohio, just an old timer, and he freaking works hard. He's 70.
He does, man.
He's 78.
I saw him out fertilizing the fields the other day on our cameras.
You'll get a kick out of this. So this is the other day we went to put food plots in. My dad came over with our tractor because this lease is 5 miles down the road from our place, which worked out pretty great. And Bob had been sitting out on his stoop. I probably since 2:30. I told him we'd be there at 2:30. I got there at 3:30, and he was just sitting out there waiting for us. And so I got there, and I was like, hey, Bob, sorry, we're running late. I said, Dad's getting started discing. I need to run back to the house real quick and grab some seed and stuff. He's like, all right, well, I'll come with you. And so he jumps on the Ranger, and we went, and he's like, kicking around our barn, looking at all of our herbicide and stuff. He's like, well, what do you use this for? What do you use this for? And
he's something else, man. Yeah. He does. He works hard though. And we were just out the other day, and we were watching our cameras, and you see him pull up next to one of our cameras, just dump a bag of corn. And it's like, well, didn't ask him to do that, but that's all right.
I don't know if all of his practices are with deer management in mind as much as they are timber. He's spraying all the greenbrier out of the hillside right by the cornfield there.
Yeah.
I don't know if a forester told him to do that but he's been
He likes clean woods is what it is, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like dirty woods.
Yeah.
But he's got beautiful timber. I mean, from a timber value standpoint, that property's loaded.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was encouraged to just by the density of it. Like, even though they're using that road system a lot, and like his son-in-law kind of is living in a cabin back there. I just don't think the fact that those deer are still at that thing every night just tells me they're not that bothered by him driving. What's going to suck is if we're hunting along that road, like at Jackson Food Plot, and he comes home in the evening. He did get a job at, not Bob, his son, at like a little plastic factory down the road or something. So,
good.
As Bob would say, he's got enough to buy his dope and some beers. And
sounds about right.
Yeah.
He's something else. But Tom, that kind of brings in a good transition point. I mean, obviously your background in property sales is pretty significant. And, Jared and I, I own a few pieces of ground, but it's something that we're always looking at and keeping our eyes at. It, from the timber properties and where we're at in Ohio and Western Pennsylvania and Kentucky to kind of farm ground. I mean, it seems like the valuation of these properties is so different across different states, from, whether we're talking about cropland and agricultural versus, timber ground versus just purely recreational and hunting. What, when you're looking at a property, or when a landowner calls you out to a property, from your side on the base camp countryside, what are you really looking at in that to attest some sort of evaluation around that piece?
We have membership for all of our guys to the Acre Value app. And I don't know if you guys have had any experience with that yet or not, but it does assess tillable land values based on, I think there's 9 criteria, from soil maps to average rainfall to obviously crop productivity. The sort of the standardized index is called the NCCPI index, which is the National Commodity Crop Productivity Index. So that's kind of the standard number that you can talk about across the country. A soil is an 80, or a field could be an 85 index. And, that's relatively high on a scale to 100. And then you can have fields that are way down in the 30s or 40s. So that's the Acre Value app. You can hover it over a field as you're doing some research on a farm, and you're immediately able to see that. And there will be many times their assessed value of that field based on that production index.
Mm-hmm.
That helps us get in the ballpark to get started. Then we're going from there and doing our, outside of the box research. And that means looking for solds in the area. As you guys know, just like in houses or anything else, comparables of recently solds are a big influence in the industry, and it can change. Man, right now we've seen,
especially where we're at in Ohio, we've got a lot of groups of Amish communities, chipping together because they all live on the same track, and they're paying top dollar for big chunks of good ground out there.
Cash.
Yeah. So the Acre Value gets us in the right direction, and then we start looking at the solds. And guys, it can change. I'm right here in central Indiana, from couple $1,000s an acre difference between here and just say southeastern Indiana. It's so also within a state, there are little subunits of economic values and considerations that greatly influence prices from one end to the other. There's some counties out to the west of Indianapolis here, DePaul University, Putnam County. That county is known for a great hunting county, but man, you can't really get into a tract of timber there for under $4,500 an acre now.
Wow.
And you can go in a county to the south, and it's still $2,800 to $3,200. So little microcosms of influence too. Tax bases create some more demand, or proximity to a metropolitan area where it's an easy 1-hour drive out from Indianapolis to get to some of these counties. Demand is high, so obviously demand and supply drives pricing too. There's no doubt about it. I'd say really noticeable since this spring, with, I'm sure it's a factor multiplied over, but the COVID influence last year, people wanting to have a getaway or their own little, place in the country. If nothing else, if they're not going to want to move out to the country, they want to have some place to go and get away.
Yeah.
And man, we have really seen that impact this from spring to midsummer here. The demand on recreational land is way up, whether it be hunting or just, like I said, just family getaway stuff.
Yeah.
That it's really in driving the prices up right now.
What county are we in Indiana?
Sullivan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What do you know about Sullivan County?
Sullivan County is known as a mining county. It was mined pretty heavily for coal, back in the 50s and 60s, left over with a lot of borrow pits, lakes and ponds filled in with replanted hillsides and borrow piles of really good cover. It's known as a tremendous recreational county. Great deer and turkey hunting, and there's some big giant deer in Sullivan County.
Yeah,
we found one of them. I mean, not like huge, but I mean a substantial 8-point.
It's kind of a bizarre track of ground run down there. It's like this. it's like there's a town and there's a railroad right at the end of the town, and literally right on the other side of the tracks is our lease, and that is butted up to on the other side by a golf course and a campground
and a county park
that's not able to be hunted. It's a few hundred acres of probably in there of nice looking timber. I mean,
a lot of it's campground and lake, but on the upper end is a large, probably 200 to 300 acre piece of timber that funnels into this lease, which then terminates at the town of Sullivan.
And there's ag on our crazy looking corn, like 12-foot tall corn when we were there last week. And then I'm not sure which direction, let's call it east. There's some giant, bean fields and stuff. And yeah, we got a big deer on that piece. I just was kind of surprised. It's like right outside of town.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all, just because the big deer pop up everywhere here.
Sure.
And a lot more commonly than people realize are what are in these little small wood lots close to town.
That's what I was thinking. Just gotta get age on
bucks
them
too, man. Like, so they're not all giants, but we've got 3-4 different bucks, just like in this little
opening.
I'm talking like nothing, little piece of opening there between two cornfields.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous growing season this year in Indiana. The corn that I planted on my farm is, like you said, 10 to 12 feet tall, and soybeans are just booming and growing. If they're larger fields where the deer aren't keeping them browsed down, production fields are huge and tall right now. We've had just an ideal amount of rainfall, a little heavy in some spots, but overall across the state, warm temperatures, not excessively dry and droughty, but just a good amount of rainfall, and the crops and food plots, even clover for this time of year on our food plots everywhere in the state, look really good right now.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a good
that
year.
That can change though.
Oh yeah,
I
mean, we're in it now. I mean,
this don't say anything about
this next 4 to 6 weeks is super critical. You get a couple good rainfalls, and I think we're through it, right?
It's been similar in Ohio, I think, too. Like, we got another rain, Jeremy, after we put we planted those plots at this lease that we have here. What was that, Friday? And then we got another. So it was pretty moist when we were putting them in, and then we got another rain right after, just quarter inch or whatever. So. Yeah, perfect. So far so good.
Yeah, I knocked on wood after I said that, because a lot of us guys here will, if we have a cereal grain component to our plots, we try to target the middle of August to the last half, so that wheat, oats, and rye won't get too tall and dry and stemmy, before we really want them to be attractive. So, but I've seen
really
great summers of beautiful weather. Man, you plant in mid-August and all of a sudden you don't get rain for 3 or 4 weeks. And of course that times, unfortunately, with the appearance of EHD. And you've got failing fall plots, or that don't even come out of the ground. And then you've got the concern of finding dead deer. And so that's a stressful time on us land managers here.
Well, we use that strategy for brassicas, especially because both Jeremy and I have had 2 or 3 years in a row of getting them in mid-August, and then it dries right up, and those brassicas never break 8 inches.
Yep.
Right.
So I put mine in like July 15th this year, and all of ours are in as of a day ago, so which is a little earlier than it says on the bag. But for oats and stuff, I think we're typically shooting for like September 1st.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. That's why I say a lot of guys, they're chomping to get on it in August, but I personally wait till the 15th or later, towards the end of the month. So by the time September 1st is ideal. But if you have other components in that blend that you want to get some maturity to, that's kind of like the compromise to me, is that
it is
second or third week of August.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm going to try get my cereal grains in. I actually sprayed this past weekend for the week of the 23rd. Is my target on that, mainly because Jared and I are heading out to North and South Dakota for mule deer hunting.
September 1st is spoken for from this point forward.
Yeah, we're kind of wrapped up for a week or so.
Have you ever been on a mule deer hunt, Tom?
One time, and it was to Nebraska just a couple years ago with Casey. We went out there and filmed the hunt, and I shot right over the top of the back of a big wide 4x4, as they would say out there. Wow. It was a cool experience. Casey killed a nice buck on that trip, but man,
was it an early season deal, like September?
It was. Yeah. Spotted a mule deer on this other side of a canyon, and I did a quick stalk. It was right getting close to dark. The sun was setting, and the problem was if I'd have had 5 more minutes, I could have calmed down and gotten my composure, but the deer had gotten up and was walking towards me, and I didn't realize it till I was peeking over a crest, and he's right there in my lap. And then, and of course, my heart was racing and pounding and adrenaline already, and I just didn't have time to slow down, take my time to range it well. And my rangefinder was bouncing all over between him and the brush over behind him. I was ranging the brush because I was shaking so badly, and I launched the arrow right over the top of it.
You know what's a great investment for all optics, but I have a rangefinder and also binoculars that have stabilized technology built into them. Have you ever seen that? It slows everything. So my rangefinder, like when I press the button, it just slows it down, and there's no shake. It just looks like this.
Yeah.
No, that's what I need for sure. I get worked up about stuff like that, man.
Who doesn't?
If you're not, you should probably quit.
Yeah.
You know, that's the whole point. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things too. I mean, you know, last year was the first year we went out and mule deer hunted the Dakotas and in North Dakota. We drew
like the Badlands.
Yeah,
area.
Badlands section. We drew again this year, which is kind of fortunate. And then we picked up a lease through you guys in Hardin County, in Northwest.
What is it, Hardin or Harding?
Harding. Yeah. And picked up a lease there, and then I've also tried to make some contacts with landowners around that lease, which probably have more alfalfa bottoms and food on it than the lease itself.
To our conversation about rainfall, it's like that's not been the case for them. They've had like a quarter inch of rain all year.
Yeah, and they only got like 2 inches of snow all winter, so there's like no moisture at all.
Yeah, which I think from a hunting perspective, we're going to be okay if we're hunting river bottoms and stuff. That's where the water's at. But the landowners are all worried about letting us on because of fire.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
I've
got a Nebraska landowner that I've been talking to and working with, and we did a plan for him back in the spring, and he followed it to a T. He's got some warm season grasses in. He's expanding his food plot program too, but he's been texting me every couple of weeks and how dry it is and how concerned he is. He's even rigged up some irrigation systems, going through a lot of work to do that. But yeah, it's super dry out there. You hate to see that.
And it can happen anywhere. I mean, that's like Jared was saying, it's been 3 years since I've had a fall food plot stand besides cereal grains, but like brassicas especially, that I look at and I'm like, man, that is a great stand of brassicas. And it's just because like typically we get it right when you plant, and then it shuts off, and either the deer start hammering on them or they just stun out.
The past 2 years has been real dry, right? Mm-hmm. The one prior was pretty good.
18 was the last one we had a good, I remember having significant stands.
We're due for a good one.
Yeah, you are.
Well, see, but I planted a month early, so I should be all right.
Yeah, you should be good. Yeah.
Well, I see a lot of, the stuff on social, a lot of the different forums and talk groups of guys that are planting different things. And I still see guys that are planting brassicas way back into the season. Maybe, I don't know, it might be on the bag that it's a component of a mix, and they just don't know any better, or they haven't experienced it. I'm sure you guys have too, where those brassicas that are planted in the front half of the year or first half of the year, they just get woody. They're stemmy and dried out. They're huge, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And the ends of the leaves might have some value to them, but the rest of the plant is just a big starchy mess.
Well, yeah, and I mean the deer just
you're
don't want to
talking
eat
like
them.
in the spring.
Yeah.
Well, our landowner in Ohio
did
does that.
Yeah.
We have plenty of brassicas that are like
I think
that
it's
right
the
now.
misconception of I plant it and it looks great, but it's also like when people in southern Mississippi plant brassicas and it's like, hey, we got 3 foot stands of brassicas. I'm like, yeah, the deer aren't eating it. Like they don't want to touch it. So it's the same mindset as like when you're in that part of March, April, May, like we did on the lease, and we get out there and we're like, oh, this is a great stand of brassicas. Yeah, the deer aren't touching it. They're just not eating it. They don't want to eat it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So it is one of those things. And, food plotting in itself, as much as like you go and talk to anybody and everybody's an expert at food plotting, right? It is very much a science of trial and error, especially within an individual property. Because I know places that I'll plant the same thing within a couple of days, and on this property it succeeds and looks great, and on this property it just completely tanks. You know?
Well, and even if you do figure it out, sometimes like this bean plot that I planted this year is like totally caught me off guard with just seems like it didn't germinate. It seems like the weeds just totally took it over. And I planted 2 other ones, same seed, same fertilizer, exact same process, exact same day, and they did great.
Look great.
And the one that failed, like I've planted before successfully. And I just don't know. I don't understand why that happened. But I think that also comes with it. You know, you just can't control it all the time.
Yeah, you bring up a good point though, because even the little micro environments on your farm, like a hilltop soil versus a bottomland soil, same seed, same day, same fertilizer, there's different results that you're going to get just because of soil composition, and obviously moisture is a huge part of that. And then also the way deer on a property respond to a food source. There's no blanket statement. You know, a guy down the road can be having tremendous luck with brassicas, and on another farm right down the street, as I said, they won't touch them. And I kind of scratch my head a lot at those, but you just don't really understand what those deer have as first, second, third choices on those properties. And, you know, for the guys that have tried brassicas and they just say the deer don't touch them, I do believe there is the learning curve.
Sure.
Deer have to understand those plants and get to try them during the stressful times to where they can key in on them, and that therefore then they can expect that or be more acquainted with that the following season. But you know, some guys have tried 2 and 3 years in a row, and the deer just don't seem to touch them. Other spots, right, as I said, even down the road, they can't even get them established.
Yeah, they just mow them.
Yeah,
it's interesting how over at I've got a plot I call Ray's plot, and I've tried 2 or 3 years to plant brassicas in there. I've had some really good luck with oats and beans in there. Both of those have grown really well for me. So I'm like, sweet, this is a good spot. I've limed fertilizer, put deer grow on this thing. I cannot grow brassicas in that thing. They just won't grow. I don't know why.
Do you think it's the deer hammering them down?
No, they just don't germinate.
It's weird.
It is bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very much trial and error. And I mean, so one of the things, Tom, that I'd like to get into with you is kind of the discussion point around like what to plant, when to plant, based on situational type of things, you know, because so for where I'm at, one of the bigger properties that I hunt in Western Pennsylvania here up on the mountain, I've got no ag around me, right? So one of the things that I plant a lot of, or at least have established a lot of, is perennial clovers, white clover, and a lot of different places. In fact, this weekend, like in a couple of the big 3 or 4 acre plots, I go in and chunk out, you know, 1/4 to a 1/2 acre, which I'll plant an annual in, but it's within a 4 acre perennial clover plot, right? I'm not taking that whole piece out. I'm just cutting pieces out of it to plant. And that's mainly for attraction, right? Bring those deer in closer to where I've got either a blind or a tree stand set up. But, you know, what we hear from a lot of guys, especially in the Midwest, is, you know, they just don't see too much of a value in perennial clovers because of the amount of ag that tends to be around them, you know, and I look at it as
I would be one of them that's leaning in that direction.
Or timber stand improvement for having browse, you know, where I'm looking at it from those key gap periods, not just because I don't have ag around me, but also, you know, as soon as we get out of that winter phase and as we get into the later part of fall, you know, those high stress periods of having that. What on your properties in the Midwest, what are you looking at? Are you planting perennials? Or are you relying on ag and TSI?
I'm blessed that I have the space and the room to do.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, we had a technical glitch there.
Ready, bud.
All right. So cool, man. So yeah, I guess kind of what we were talking about there prior, obviously anybody that's watching this on YouTube has seen the landscape change by Tom, technical difficulties. But what we're looking at there is, so where I'm at in southwestern Pennsylvania, there's no ag, right? So I've got a huge need for perennials to kind of provide that nutrition year round, be able to fill those critical stress period gaps. But what we hear from a lot of people in the Midwest, Jared included, is that because of all the ag and also the timber stand improvement that he's doing, he's not, and they aren't planting perennial clovers as much. I guess where you're at, what are your strategies around that right now?
Well, first of all, I'm extremely fortunate or blessed that I have the ability to do all of that. I'm a big proponent of, when you can, implementing all those strategies. Timber stand improvement is huge, utilizing agricultural crops and having the perennial clover base. But I talk about it quite a bit to my buddies that I really truly think that those gaps that you're talking about are super important to have filled. And in the Midwest here, perennial clover is a workhorse in that environment, in that particular situation. Just when you think about that analogy of the tabletop or the plate being empty, when is it empty, and when are they needing it the most?
Mm-hmm.
Crops are out of the field, and say even though they're scattered grain, waste grain in the field, they're going to be picked clean or close to it, and they're not going to be planting again until May.
Yep.
A lot of times here in the Midwest, you're going to see beans and corn going in maybe late April, but usually early through mid-May. What is there to fill that gap? A perennial clover in my property is greening up those early days in March, when you have some of those nice sunny days when the temps get up to 60, 65 degrees. Man, that clover just blows out of the ground and starts to flush.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about March, April, May, well, there's 3 months there that clover is filling that gap and putting food back on that plate that's otherwise empty. Same thing in the fall is those clovers, yeah, they stunt out or begin to go into dormancy in a frost period, or when we start encountering those first fall frosts. But even though they're frosted and dormant, they're still green and available. Hence why deer haul down through the snow to get to perennial clovers in the middle of the winter, because their clover leaves are still standing there green. They're not brown, dead, dried out, undesirable vegetative mass. They're actually a desirable food source. So it's huge for me. I like to have it. I consider it as a buffer. It's a fill-in. It's always there. It's that workhorse. It's that backbone of my food plot system. And I supplement that with annual plantings of both spring and fall. And then I top that off with my timber stand improvement work and managing my native grounds. So I think if a guy has the ability to do all that in conjunction, there's no better formula.
Mm-hmm.
I think my reason to reduce, not eliminate clover plantings on my farm is, so I went from maybe, I don't know, an acre and a half to like a half an acre. And I replaced those with some fall plantings of either brassicas or a cereal grain. So if you want to call it a backbone of like my food system, essentially would be all of the TSI that I have done, which is probably 200-300 acres at this point over 4 or 5 years. And also the fact that a bunch of the fields that we've left alone on our farm, it's a bunch of old pasture ground, has a significant amount of clover in it. I'm talking, there have been years where if you were to go out and cut one of these pastures, it looks better than my clover plots. And
sure.
And I don't know. I've asked a few guys, and I haven't got 100% foolproof answer. But between those two things, it seems like they've got more than enough, food to get them through those tough times. And I know not everybody has that situation, but.
Well, that's good. That's specific to you. And we mentioned a few moments ago about how every property is different, and you've got to sort of find out what's lacking on your particular property and what works at your place. But I agree with you 100%. A lot of those old pasture fields, whether it's dropped in by the air, by bird seed or bird droppings or what have you, there's clover in a lot of places. Matter of fact, look at anybody that's trying to grow a nice lawn and keep their Kentucky bluegrass. You're always battling clover coming in.
Yep.
And it does remarkably well as a wild plant. So it's there. But yeah, for guys that don't have that ability or don't have those openings to maximize the potential of what they do have to work with, is sort of looking at the calendar, understanding through the season, when are you most vulnerable to losing deer nutrition? When, if the ideal scenario is that they're never lacking even a week of having a desirable food source where they might have to leave your property. But TSI does grow. It does. I totally agree with you. It goes a long, long way. We just tend to think of what we're providing with planted food sources as auxiliary or a buffering food, if we can. On my place, I don't know if you guys have followed it all, but I converted 17 acres of tillable land to a wildlife habitat project, going into its third growing season now. And it's a combination of warm season grasses, tree plantings, cove fields that are still planted into ag, and in and around and between all of the rows, the perimeter trail, in between the tree planting rows and of course around the warm season grasses is about a 15 to 16 foot wide clover lane. So in all total, there's probably 3.5 to 4 acres of clover in and around that property, but it's in conjunction with the ag and
Yep.
major heavy TSI work done in my timber.
Well, I think that's one big thing that, you know, kind of going through my steps of management is I used to use clover mainly for fire breaks, right? And it was advantageous in that way because maybe you didn't want to, you know, give up one of your half acre or acre openings to a perennial for the next 4 to 5 years. But if we could create these fire breaks with it, it adds up a lot. And these lanes
Sure
provide,
does.
you know, not only just for deer, but whether you're talking about rabbits or quail or whatever, right? There's a great source of nutrition there. And also always making it close to cover usually makes it very used by those wildlife pieces. But one of the things that's kind of changed my mindset, and I've been back and forth on the perennial side, like at one point it was always like, hey, I'm going to plant 20% of my food plots in perennial. You know, I'm probably north of that now, but it's mainly because I'm primarily a bow hunter. I don't have any ag where I'm at least on this one main property I'm hunting in Pennsylvania. If I plant brassicas, I know for a fact that most of my brassicas are getting crushed between the second week of November and the end of November. And so for that entire month of October, and even for the first week or two of November, like I won't see a deer in my brassicas. They just, where I'm at, they just won't come in. And so especially with my young boys, trying to get them to hunt and harvest usually with crossbow in an early archery season, it's like, listen, I'm mainly focused on those first 6 weeks of the season. It's not that I won't hunt after that, but that's where my entire effort is. So why am I planning something that mainly is attractive in the 6th, 7th, and 8th week of the season? So it's just, again, I think it goes back to personal strategy and how you're hunting and what your property's set up for to kind of determine what you're going to use it around.
I think your property also lacks a lot of the like the pasture ground type stuff that I have. So I think clover is a lot more important for your place than mine.
Yeah, planted clover at least. Yeah.
One I think that a lot of guys overlook or don't give enough credit to, like clover seems to be like the winning of these two crops, but I think chicory is like super attractive to deer, and it does really well in a lot of environments.
Drought tolerant as well.
It's a really nice complement to clover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talk about clover, you know, just off the cuff like that, but when I talk about perennial clover, it in my opinions and in my suggestions, it's always a component of that. There's a percentage of clover that definitely has chicory in it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just at my farm yesterday, over the weekend, and all of those lanes and fire breaks, the clover is standing tall, and it could use another clipping as related to that moisture that we've had again this year. But every chicory plant in that entire buffer is cropped off, is eaten.
Yeah.
Very attractive plant. There's no doubt about it. I've never really planted chicory as a standalone by itself in a plot. I know a lot of guys that do. But I just like thinking it's a wonderful complement in a perennial clover field. And if you're going to do clover, you might as well.
Mm-hmm.
The trick is that at that percentage, you don't want to put, 6 to 7 pounds of chicory if it's calling for 6 to 7 pounds or maybe even 9 pounds, depending on the variety in an acre. You want to cut it back a half rate or maybe even a third or a quarter of the rate, because those big leaves, as you guys know, they can almost kind of do the same thing that a heavy brassica planting can do, is arch out over the top of your clover and shade out a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point.
I had a question. I've got 2 questions for you. First, where can we watch the transformation of that property? Are you posting that on YouTube?
It's all on the Management Advantage, either the website or the YouTube channel.
Okay.
It's called Project 17. It goes back to the very first day that we talked about the design behind it. And I did a graphic. My background at Purdue is landscape architecture. So I drew
awesome.
this thing out years in advance, and struggled with the final layout because, once it's in. Of course you can change it, but I didn't want to have any regrets. So I just spent a lot of time considering all of the variables there, mainly deer movement as I knew them on the farm and how I could complement that.
Yeah.
So that's, if somebody looked at the design and said, why did you do it this way? It's because of the history
Mm-hmm.
that I have there. But anyway, from the very beginning of planting the trees and planting the warm season grasses and getting the row crops in, and we're due for a follow-up. 3 years in now, it's absolutely stunning to go to that farm and think that this was the day that we started was a stubble cornfield. To look at it now,
Wow,
that's really cool.
Phenomenal, the transition.
The other one was you talked about cutting the clover. So that's something that Jeremy and I have talked to a couple guys on here. It seems controversial, not as much as the moon, but like, we've had guys ranging from, you got to cut it like every time, whatever, 2-3 times a year, to like not at all. I'm just curious where you stand on that and why.
I think that the not at all opinions have just come about recently with some results of some studies that show the measurable tonnage of the field and the productivity as far as before, during, and after a cut versus a standalone field that's never been cut. It really does make sense when you think about it, as far as the newly emerging growth is where the protein is at, and those tender young tops are the most desirable and the highest of protein levels. Although I take a balanced approach to it on my property. If it's tall and full and there's not a lot of weed competition going on, and by the way, I use herbicides on my clover too, but I try to use the mechanical control versus herbicide control as much as I can. But there's no doubt about it, clipping your clover occasionally in a season where there's a lot of moisture and it's growing well is a wonderful way to combat weed competition.
Sure.
There's no doubt about it, because clover flushes back out so quickly.
Yeah.
Now, within reason, if you turn your back on your farm and come back 2 months later, you're going to have a weed infested field more than likely, because it just does need that. You think about the deer are always working that clover down, and it's allowing those weeds to poke through that into that sunlight. But where I'm very, very skeptical or cautious, I should say, is when it's hot and dry. I never try to mow my clover when it's hot and dry at all.
Sure.
A year like this year we're having here in Indiana, you could mow your clover once a month and be just fine, because 4 to 6 days later it's back up to 6 to 8 inches tall again.
Right.
Now, having some foresight going into the fall here, just let's say August does turn off dry and we get into September, and I'm battling, do I want to do a setback now or do I leave it go? I'll probably err on the cautious side and let it go, especially if it's turning off drier. But no, I get what they're saying about removing the expense and the time involved versus the benefit of mowing. Are you gaining anything? Yeah, you're definitely losing that valuable available tonnage, but I guess we're getting back to site specific, farm specific. What does your field look like? Does it have a lot of weeds? And is the moisture there will allow you to get away with it without hurting?
Is the weeds the primary reason for mowing, or is it kind of my?
I think it's 3 spans there. It's mechanical method for controlling those broadleafs, right? You're not going to,
which works.
And if you mow your grasses, you still need to spray those out, right? You're not killing them, but your
clover.
Right. It's then if you mow, the anti-mowing people are saying if you mow, you're reducing the biomass of that plot, which you very well could be. But if you are mowing,
is that the main argument against mowing? Okay.
If you are mowing, you are creating new shoots, which, to Tom's point, are usually more preferred, higher crude protein.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. Have there been any studies to show that, or is it just purely observational?
That's the trade-off, I think, though. Biomass versus new shoots and protein.
Correct. I'd say that's a great way to just do the ultimate, comparison or your choices of options there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you have broadleafs and annuals in there,
no argument there. It definitely helps with the broadleafs, but there are studies that show that the newer shoots and stuff have 100%. Higher protein or are more desirable.
They've been around a long time. You can
really,
and it's real easy to go out. You could do it yourself. You could pull the tops off of several different types of plants and send them off and have them analyzed for crude protein levels.
Who was it that was saying?
It's not many people think about that, but that's certainly an viable option for you. But heck, since forages have been raised for grazing animals, that's been a common understanding that.
Does Tom know Bronson?
Probably.
That newest growth is going to be the highest level of protein.
Yeah. So we had a podcast not long ago with Bronson Strickland from Mississippi State Deer Lab, and Bronson and we've always talked about this because he's looking at it from a biomass standpoint.
Okay.
And he's saying if you want to have optimal biomass, and keep in mind here, kind of the parallel to it is that, yes, if I mow it and new shoots come up, they're higher protein, probably more digestible because they're younger. But there's a level to which a deer can't process that much protein, right? So if it was eating something that's 35% crude protein, it's going to poop out 15 plus.
So he's saying
percent
that
of it.
higher protein doesn't necessarily
Well,
matter.
it just depends on where you're at. Now, again, and this is one of the reasons that we plant a lot of white clover over red clover is because the more stemmy, right, these clovers are, and this is not a scientific word, stemmy, but the harder it is to digest, thus the less protein they're extracting out of it.
Yeah.
Most white clovers are not as
leafy.
They're more leafy based, but as that thing matures, right, it does become tougher in its composition, thus becomes less digestible versus if you mowed and it's very new, young, nutritious, luscious, like that kind of thing. So I think it's fine lines, right? If me personally, I would mow to control broadleafs, and if I get a benefit of cutting some of the clover on that and creating new young shoots, awesome. But if I don't have to, if I look at a clover plot and it's not overrun by broadleafs, I probably
it
won't
almost
cut
seems
it.
like you need several factors. Like if there aren't
100%.
broadleaves and they are getting mature, like I don't know if that's enough to cut.
Well,
it.
like, and even what Tom's saying, if it's dry and hot, even if there are broadleaves,
Certainly.
probably don't cut it.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to put it into an even more stressful situation. And when you guys think about the appearance or the presence of blooms and blossoms is an indicator that clover is ending. It's getting near the end of its growing cycle, and it's about to put on its flowering so it can put on seeds. So that's an indicator. It always has been for me, is that you see a field full of blooms. In the good times when you can mow, if your field's full of blossoms, it's about done, and therefore those tender shoots are starting to harden off, and it's ending that cycle. So it's a good time to think about mowing if it's a good season, if you have that weed competition.
Sure.
But to remove it just to mow it, for especially in white clover, as that's a great point too. And even further dialing it in between white clovers, you have the improved white clovers, which are the combination. It's a hybrid cross between Ladino clover and the Dutch white.
Yep.
You're getting that low lush tendency of a Dutch white, but also the big leaves of the Ladino. And that stemminess you're talking about is that lignin. That's a non-digestible start. That's hard for them to process, but those more soft vegetative masses of the lower lignin plants are obviously in our world, we're not putting that up for hay. So you don't need them to stick together in a bale once it's dried down. We're just really strictly talking about browsing animals here that benefit better from that type of a plant. So if you're dealing with white clovers and you're not battling weeds, let it go. Let it go.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And it's situational. What's the weather? What's your property look like? Maybe you mow one, maybe you don't mow another. You stagger them out. I think that it ultimately comes down to there's a lot of people that are mowing and doing things in the right strategy. And then the majority of clover guys are mowing because they just like the look of what it looks like after they're done mowing.
Or
probably a
they
great
just think
point.
they're supposed to.
Yeah, they're just like, man, that looks great. And they have no idea that they could potentially be reducing the biomass and not working as well, or they just mowed a bunch of grass that ultimately is going to probably come back thicker and faster than the clover that they just cut. So there's a lot of things there, and I get it. People are absolutely afraid of using herbicides on their food plots. They don't like to. They'd rather mow than use herbicides, and I get that, and I do too, to a point. But you have to understand what you're dealing with in that plot, and then what's the final benefit. There's a reason you should be able to get 4, 5, 6 years out of a great perennial white clover plot is because you maintain it and manage it correctly.
Great point. What I struggle battling here is Pennsylvania smartweed and curly dock.
Yep.
And they're really hard to kill, even with mowing. They'll, as a broadleaf plant, they'll come back in a short order and start to mass out and really crowd out your clover.
Yeah.
It's been 2 weekends ago that I sprayed all my clover with imazicast, which is IMOX or imazicast, have the same active ingredient in it. and 6 ounces an acre. It's relatively an expensive herbicide, but a little bit goes a long way.
Sure.
And works great. It's not. I was out there, as I said, this last Saturday and Sunday, and all of the smartweed is yellow and drooping, and the curly dock is looking sickly too and curling up. So,
well, and I think one of the things that Jared and I talk about, Tom, is that not all broadleafs are the same, right? Because I know one thing you've had issues with is ragweed, which is a phenomenal,
especially
native,
in my beans.
Yeah, phenomenal deer food, but to the point of where, again, most guys are looking at that and like, man, look at all these weeds on my plot. I got to cut it. I got to kill it. And you need to manage it. But there also is a benefit to the deer having that ragweed in the plot.
Yep. Common ragweed for sure.
Yes.
Which is the more feathery leafed, shorter variety. Giant ragweed, as we all know.
Yeah, not so much.
Not so much. I'm not saying they don't use it. They do eat it, but it can quickly become a huge nuisance in a field because it gets so big and tall.
Yep.
Yeah. The last few years on those, when I converted this field from full ag to habitat, I'm playing kind of farmer in those tillable fields. And one of the things I quickly learned was that pigweed, which is water hemp.
Oh yeah.
And mare's tail, as you guys know, it's a common topic these days, which are increasingly more glyphosate resistant. You turn your back on a field. I was doing some custom work for a guy and didn't visit my farm for 2 or 3 weeks during the hot part of June and July. And I came back and my fields were overrun with pigweed. And I enlisted the help of a couple poor soul buddies of mine. And we did a lot of hand pulling and carrying them off by the armloads. So this year I changed my strategy. I went with Liberty resistant crops. And the difference 1 year makes from the herbicide control that I got from glufosinate, which is Liberty, versus glyphosate, which is Roundup, was tremendous. And I'm a believer. I'm going to use those from now on.
Interesting.
Just because my soil is prone to have those seeds dormant there and can cause me some issues.
I guess last thing on Clover, and we can kind of wrap it up here. As far as like a time frame, and I know it's dependent on if you've got competing broadleaves and also if you've got adequate precipitation, but for a fall cutting of clover, like what would be a time frame that you're kind of looking to do that?
As I said, if the soil moisture is there, I can literally mow my clover one weekend and go back the following, because I'm an hour and a half from my farm, so I don't have the ability to be there much during the week. It really can be back to almost its full potential in a week's time under the ideal conditions. I would probably say 2 or 3 weeks prior would be a safe bet. If you're thinking about
prior to season, so like mid-September.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Early to mid-September might be your last, just to be safe.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I know that I've had it around like I've heard about different periods of dormancy, like in clover, and like I've heard it's like, don't cut after 4th of July, and then don't cut before a certain time, because during these months of
high stress,
August,
hot,
or maybe even September, it's like it's just not growing, so don't cut it then. Or I don't know.
I think it's condition based. I mean, in most cases, August is hot and dry, and so don't cut it because it's probably trying to withhold a lot of its resources versus expending. But if
that's generally tied to lack of rain in August.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here in Pennsylvania, is 50 some degrees this morning on the mountain. That's not common where we're at.
Does any temperature to like be aware of? Does it matter?
Hot and dry. Yeah.
Just hot and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
It's amazing I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. It's amazing what a cool night and some heavy dew can do to a clover field. But yeah, it's just common sense. If the ground's hard and dry and cracked and it's scorching hot, don't mow your clover.
Don't mow it.
If a plant that's healthy, growing well, the conditions are a little bit cooler and we're getting plenty of rainfall, you can grab the top layer of the soil and it holds moisture. You can create a ribbon in your hand. That's a good indicator that there's plenty of soil moisture there. The plant will tell you just by looking at the cues that it's giving you. Is it full and all leafed out and wide open, or is it curling up and sort of really in that stressful holding its reserves mode? You can just look at it and tell a lot of times. Just paying attention to your surroundings and what you're dealing with. Just because your buddy the next state over is mowing his doesn't mean it's time for you to do yours. Maybe you should skip it.
I'm interested to see. I've got a food plot this year that was initially, it's a real solid stand of clover, and I dissed half of it under and planted it in brassicas in mid-July. I'll be interested to see just kind of throughout the fall here what the usage on each side of that plot looks like.
Did you spray that side? Nuke it?
No, I rototilled it though. Like I completely.
I bet you get a bunch of clover come back up.
Maybe. I did last year when I just dissed it.
That root system is just, it's resistant.
I bet the brassicas will shade it out.
Yeah.
But maybe the following spring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's something we did this year too. I got real just willy-nilly with seed this year, especially on not my personal property, but on Jed's and at Bob's. In fact, I threw soybeans into Bob's the other day. Almost all of those plots I did at Jeb's and Bob's have soybeans, a lot of brassicas, like purple top, turnip, radish, rape, and clover. I did clover in most of them too.
Yep. It'll come up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the clover is like resistant enough that like even if we don't see it this fall, we'll see a little bit of it. It should really, be there in March, April. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I love brassicas. I really like radishes and turnips too, but I like radishes just because of the soil, effects that it has after the season, the aeration, once it breaks down, the amount of organic matter that goes back in. But from a hunting standpoint, just less and less I won't say that I'm not having success. I'm just not seeing the results. And again, it's probably personally towards how I hunt, which is those first 6 weeks of the season is where I'm really putting my investment in versus the latter half of the season. But, I know on your property, you're very brassica invested.
Well, our season dates match up for that. In Ohio, I can hunt from September 28th to February 7th. And so that third week of November is probably debatably the best hunting that we have.
Give or take, we're sometimes out of season here for that.
Yep.
Yeah. Tom, I guess talking about your 17-acre project here, you mentioned, and I thought this was interesting, you mentioned kind of building a lot of that around the movement of deer and kind of your experience on that, which kind of lets you, apply an architecture plan around that. When you're talking about those movements, is it observationally, like tree stand type movement? Is it cameras? Is it both? Like, how are you laying out that observation to say, all right, here's how I know these deer are moving, and so here's how I'm going to essentially construct this strategy?
It is probably a factor of all those. The topography is also critical. I know just from history of, say, the deer bedding up on the ridges to the west, and there's 3 or 4 finger ridges that drop down into the field, and you just through hunting over the years, you see those deer doing that just naturally. There's also a real heavy brushy creek bottom on the north side of that field, and there's one little pocket corner that they tend to file up out of the bottom. So those were areas that I decided to leave into open food in ag so that hunting opportunities would be presented there just from a visibility standpoint. But I would say topography and just studied habitual movement patterns from the deer over the years that I observed and noted allowed me to sort of key those locations. Plus they make sense.
Sure.
They fit the, when I say coves, they literally are little hooked in little field isolated cove pockets as opposed to out into the square area of the main design. So that lends itself nicely too to having edge all the way around it, and good cover a short distance away.
In line with topography, probably access is an offshoot of that as well.
For sure. Yeah. And I designed the road system around the perimeter to be able to be walked or sneaked in on with 6 to 7 tall warm season grasses at the edge of that. So all the way around the entire thing, depending on the wind direction, you can sneak around the field and get out and get in without being, unless you're not being careful, of course.
Right.
Or unless
for
you're
the most
7
part,
foot tall.
you can be pretty covert about getting in and out.
Yeah.
I know you're a big family guy, and especially when it comes to the hunting side of things, you're very involved with friends and family. Did that factor into kind of how you lay this thing out for I say that mainly because I am too. Like I've my kids, my dad, like we all hunt smaller pieces of ground. And so I'm always trying to think about how to make it available for more people to hunt. I know, Jared, we've had this conversation about even your property at 1,000 acres. Like, most properties can only handle so much hunting. So I'm trying to think of how to bring people in to have the availability to hunt, but without pressuring it so much to where literally I make it, miserable for everybody that is hunting.
Right. Yeah. Our property lays out and feels a lot bigger than it is just because we have in the timber, I have 3 food plots scattered around on the ridge tops. And now in the 17 project field, we have, there's 3 ag food plot areas, but there's various stands around and in the entire 17, depending on wind direction and timing of the year. So I hunt very surgically and strategically and carefully. And if the wind's not right, we won't hunt a spot. And to your point, I have 2 daughters that are in their mid to late 20s. Morgan is now married. Both have men in their lives. Now I have a son-in-law. Both are named Zach, and they're awesome guys. And I love having them around, and they've become, hunting buddies for me too. And my daughters have always hunted with me too. So we don't have the ability to really host a lot of people during the really intense times when we're trying to kill a big buck in the rut, just because of that fear of over pressuring the farm and mature bucks picking up on that. But if it's just a handful of us, I feel like I can spot us, and we use an electric vehicle to get around, and we don't, we're quiet. We don't do a lot of noise, and we're not rambunctiously running across the farm through all hours a day. It's in and out, and it's careful. And it's, as I said earlier, it's very undercover and hidden for the most part. But I love to have the family there. Years ago, I kind of went from being a selfish trophy hunter to being a guy that still wanted to manage for mature bucks, but also really super enjoyed the camaraderie and the enjoyment of hunting with my family. And to me, as I've gotten older, that's as much of an importance to me than anything. So it is possible to do both. Somebody that's an ultra high end
It's not.
consultant might tell me that I'm
Wrong.
I'm probably ruining my chances for holding 200-inch deer on my property.
Well,
the trade-off is
I think Jeremy's like looking at me because we're like not at odds on this thing, but
No, but we have
it's a situation that I deal with. It's not like politics or anything. It's just simply like, are the deer there or are they not? It's a limited resource. If you kill them while they're young, they are not going to get older.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that or you guys, your family's the only impact on that herd.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly we have an impact.
I guess how do you manage that, Tom? Like with your daughters or your son-in-laws, like do you guys get on the same page of like, hey, we don't want to shoot this deer? Or I guess how does that work?
Or is it even further, Tom, to where you're saying like, okay, Zach, you're hunting this spot and you guys kind of dictate how the property gets hunted?
I have a lot of input in that, and those guys trust my judgment.
Yep.
Just because of how intimately I know the place. Backing up a step, absolutely, we have cameras running all year, so I'm formulating a list of bucks that we have, who's mature, what age do I think they are, and who's not. For example, we have a deer last year that we called Pretty Boy. That was a 2-year-old perfect 10, just a gorgeous 10-pointer. You guys are smiling because you probably have one too.
Mm-hmm.
But now as a 3-year-old, he's a 6x6, and I mean, he's jaw dropping as a 3-year-old. And I was showing them pictures just a couple days ago of him, and Morgan said, "Dad, we got to pass him again." And I said, well, "I'm all in. It's kind of like, can you pass him?" And she said, "Absolutely." So we buy in as a family. We buy in that we know that we're managing for. It's not all about inches. It's about maturity.
Yep.
A 4 or 5-year-old buck is what we're after.
And experience. I mean, to your point about with your family.
Yeah.
It is. I'm not like dead set against like you have to stick to your goals. You have to shoot a 4-year-old. Like if the mood strikes you right, but the key thing I think you're saying there is like you guys are all on the same page, and so like nothing against the guys that hunt my farm in Ohio. It's a bunch of family friends. There's 5 or 6 of us. So, but like when Jeremy and I go and hunt a piece of property, our management goals we're very like-minded in that regard, and also our hunting strategies are very similar. So there's rarely ever any conflict. But when I hunt my family farm with these guys, we're not all on the same page. I've got guys that are more than happy with a 2-year-old, and I've got guys that want to hunt regardless of wind. And I don't own the property. It's my dad owns it, so I have some influence. And certainly, I'm doing a lot of work, putting a lot of money into the place, running all the trail cameras. So I have influence. But it's just a little different.
I think it's just hard to get everybody on the same page, especially at varying levels in their career of what they've harvested, where they hunted, what they're seeing now. I mean, because for some guys, like guys coming from Pennsylvania, they see a 3-year-old in Ohio. That's a big buck.
Yeah. They also struggle, I think, some of them do anyways, with identifying deer. Seems to really be a struggle for some of them.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you're running the cameras and stuff, are you putting together like an album for the family or just like communicating pictures through text message? Like, I guess, how formal are you in that?
I'm pretty informal. I just save them to folders on my computer. And when we're together on the weekends for a family dinner, I'll say, hey, check out this week's, latest images. So I'm always having those conversations.
And your wife says, Tom, we're at family dinner. Like, you can wait till after.
I get that too. But my wife rolls her eyes because she knows it's coming. She's used to it.
Yeah.
But
mine too.
Yeah.
I like what you said a moment ago about buy-in and goals. I guess for both of the Zacks, they sense that they're part of something.
You're like, listen,
special.
You want to marry my daughter? You hunt this buck. You shoot another one, you're gone. You're done.
I don't rule them with an iron fist like that, but I think they respect me enough to know that we're working hard to try to make this as best as we can, but it's for their enjoyment too. Mm-hmm. Probably any other property that they may hunt, their standards might be lowered quite a bit, but they feel like they have some vested interest in this and they have some sweat equity built into it too, that we have a pretty decent amount of control where we're at now. And odds are good that buck will survive if we let him pass.
Yeah.
Which is a great feeling. That's getting better all the time.
That's a big part of it as well. I think part of the struggle with my guys is like they do trust my judgment, and we've given it a shot at like my way for several years now. The problem is these deer get killed by the neighbors, or we've got deer just get locked up. They just die.
Yep.
And the longer that happens, they're like, well, this isn't happen. And so I have guys that want to reduce the goal. They say, well, listen, it's not possible to get a deer till 4. And I still believe that it is. And so we have like kind of a subtle agree to disagreement on what is possible.
Do you have a fairly good relationship, Tom, with your neighbors to understand kind of what's going on in the neighborhood?
I'm really lucky in that sense too, because it's worth mentioning. I just actually closed on an additional 36 acres that joins me to the north.
Very
and
nice.
It was kind of like the last piece of the puzzle of that was an impact on where we were hunting. That the guys that were hunting there probably took their minimum standards were a lot lower than ours.
Yep.
And so the future even looks better for us. We just it's primarily all timber, but it's pretty critical in the way that the deer move through that property, getting down to my ag fields. So things are even looking more promising. And then my largest landowner that joins me to the west by default is just a huge block of timber. And there's only a couple people that can hunt there by permission. And from what I know about those guys, they're kind of like your, I hate to use the term, but the kind of a weekend shotgun opening weekend kind of guys. And they're not in there putting the time in. They don't think they get too far off the beaten path to get back into the core of the property. So I almost look at it as I have a pretty huge sanctuary by default to my west.
Well, and I think to your point, Jared, like, and again, this kind of goes back to the whole buying real estate. And obviously this is family farm, so it's a little bit different. But in Tom's case, like, that's one of the first things I look at and talk about is like what's going on in the neighborhood. So like even the 80 acres I bought in Kentucky, like there's 200 plus that border me that at some point I'd like to acquire. And then there's national forest ground that's on my other side to my east, but the nearest access point is like 2.6 miles from my border.
Yeah.
And so like when I start to look at it, I'm like, all right, like maybe this isn't like Midwest farm ground, but it's definitely got the neighborhood that I can grow or at least get bucks to maturity. And like what I can grow antler size, who knows? Like it's going to vary, but I can get bucks to 4 or 5 because of the pressure around it is just non-existent.
Yeah. Well, or there's just there's just enough country there. Like you said, the family farm is. If I had specifically gone and was looking to buy a piece of ground to kill a giant deer off of, it may have not been it. You know, I'd have looked at some of the Amish communities to the southwest. I'd have observed some of the hunting pressure around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great property, and it's a big property, but it's not probably as good in that respect as this lease that we picked up. So like Tom, my answer to the struggles that we've had just on our property is like, okay, instead of getting mad at anybody for shooting deer they want to shoot or whatever, I'm going to just continue working on this property, and I want to find a way to also achieve my goal, which is to, shoot a big deer. And so Jeremy and I went out and leased another piece of ground that I think has better potential.
Almost 400 acres of timber through base camp leasing.
Better potential for that. And like I said, Jeremy and I's strategies are like-minded. Our management goals are like-minded. There was not as many people impacting the outcome of the deer herd there. So, I kind of got best of both worlds. I can have a happy deer camp where everybody's having fun, shooting deer they want to shoot, and I can still go 5 minutes down the road and try to hunt a big buck.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot of
Tom,
guys.
Tom, real quick, to pull that camera down just a hair. I'm getting a lot of ceiling.
There we go.
There you go.
A lot of guys are really, you deal with what you have, right? Your family owns this property, or you have permission on this one farm. You don't really have many choices or option of what goes on around you. And that old adage is you always want to own your neighbor's property and control it. And it's just not in the cards for the majority of hunters these days. Our original purchase on this piece was way back in 1997.
Wow.
And really didn't know, other than when I bought it, it just looked awesome, and it was in a good part of the county, and the price was right, and it was an opportunity. But I guess I kind of lucked into that situation by not knowing any better. And then over time, as I've gotten older and have been able to add to the property, I've purchased ground to my east and to my north now, and we have more and more control. But I still am blessed with a great situation on the other sides of me. But to the guys that don't have that, and you got people that sit on your fence line and they're shooting deer as they cross the fence that guys are passing on your side, that's very frustrating. And it's one that I can sympathize with, because I was in those battles too as a younger man. I completely know what that feels like.
It's so hard to assess too, even as a current landowner, but certainly as a potential landowner when you're considering ground. And this isn't really a dig as much as it is just the reality is I think of the percentage of guys that will tell you that they'll pass on a 3-year-old, I think it's about 10% will actually do that.
100%.
Yeah.
In my experience.
I would agree.
If that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, number one is identifying
in my
it's a
area.
3-year-old.
Who knows? You go to Iowa, it may be different.
Yeah. I mean, number one, it's identifying it's a 3-year-old
right.
first off.
Right.
And then, passing it's a whole different ballgame. Because, I mean, like, I still see that now. Like, I mean, the number of guys that I'll run into and they'll be like, oh, yeah, was out in so-and-so's bean field and saw like a 150 out there last night. I'm like, you realize how big a 150-inch deer is? Like, that's a very big buck. Like, you probably saw a 130, and I mean, it looked big compared to the 1-year-olds it was with, but like, to see a 150, like that's a big deer. And they just
I agree a lot with that. There's an overuse of giant and monster. And,
you're describing my dad.
Scores are constantly being conflated and over exaggerated.
This is an interesting.
A lot of it comes down to education. It really does.
Yeah.
I think I have as much influence on my kids and my son-in-law of educating them of what the difference is between a 3-year and 4-year-old buck and beyond, and how much potential that deer might have in a couple of years. So, hey, and to be totally candid with you guys, it's not been forever ago that I was shooting 3-year-olds and proud of them.
Yeah.
I'm 55 this year.
Yeah.
And I shot, I think, mid 2000s, I shot a couple deer that were 3 years old and was super proud of them. It's just that as I've aged and I've become more content with ending a season without a tag field. And as a landowner, that's a huge driver for me. with that control that I talked about, it's like, what if we could really look at maybe this deer surviving another year or two, what could we have? But a lot of people are at various stages along that curve in life.
Yeah.
And I won't fault a guy
No.
that does that.
Well, and Jeremy, and I should be clear too.
Jared, to your point,
neither
I'm sorry
do
to
we.
interrupt you, but that is in a camp like that setting where you've got complete opposite ends of the spectrum in the same camp on the same property,
It's tough.
that can be tough.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because if you extrapolate that over just all hunters and you look at why conflict exists, it makes a lot of sense. It's a limited resource, and we're all vying for it for different reasons and with different weapons and at different times of the year. Like, of course, there's going to be conflict. You know, we all have different goals and stuff. I do, Jeremy, I just want to be clear too. It's like there's absolutely nothing wrong with shooting a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old or any legal deer.
No.
But we're fully in favor of it.
Just
This
not what we wanna
conversation
shoot.
is just really hyper focused on like our goals on a specific piece of property, and we realize that that's not everybody's.
And most of them it is, like even in Pennsylvania, like it may not be a 150-inch deer, but my goal is a 4-year-old or older. And
Sure.
in a lot of cases, actually in my home state, I'm focused on a particular buck. That buck hasn't shown up this year, which is giving me a lot of
Well,
heartburn.
and there are valid
but-
reasons for our standards being what they are. It's like, first
Yeah.
of all, we've harvested some deer. We also understand that a deer shows, X percentage of potential at
I know.
3 years old, at 4 years old. And so us loving whitetail deer want to see them reach their maximum potential. And we see that as,
Yeah. So Tom, this is a good question for you, because this is kind of how I get into my mind. And it's not that let me put it this way. It's not that I won't shoot another buck over 4, but typically it doesn't matter what property I'm on and what state, for whatever reason, it's just my style is I get honed in on a deer, right? Like I've got one in Pennsylvania for the last 3 that I've tried to kill. He hasn't shown up yet, still fingers crossed, but who knows? And I lock in on that deer, and that's the deer I hunt. Now, there are other bucks in the area that I potentially could come across where it's like, you know what, if that buck shows up, he's 4 or 5, like I'll probably shoot him, but it's not my strategy. It's not the one I'm hunting. On your property, do you have that same kind of strategy, or are you knowing in different areas of the property you're hunting different deer?
They pretty much all will use the entire property at some point during their travel during the season. And our property now is just under 160 acres. So it's not a giant piece of property by any means. So I'm routinely getting, the same bucks from the far south end to the north end and east and west.
Yep.
But absolutely, there will be what we consider the top deer on the hit list. And everybody, I say everybody, knows if you have an opportunity at that deer in particular, you better take it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy. I'm just as happy as if Zach Morgan or Lauren kills that deer if I do at this stage of my life. So, so my personal situation is that we look at the core of bucks, the list of bucks we've got. I think this year, if all works out well, we'll probably have 4 to 5 4-year-olds and up.
Wow.
And if any of those comes by, it's fair game. However, you sure wish that the top deer on that list is the one to make an appearance.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I think ultimately it makes sense that, everyone would evolve to that position, but like I'm not quite there yet. I haven't killed, very many deer over 150, one deer over 150, and so maybe after I've got, I don't know, half dozen of those or whatever, maybe eventually I'll start to feel like, okay, like I'm feeling like I can do that with not ease, but I can accomplish that. Now I want to set out to kill this one specific.
And there's
animal.
some states that don't, like when we're in Kansas, like last year I killed that buck in Kansas. Like I wasn't
You
hunting
have to
that
have
deer.
the time and resources.
Yeah, I was just
to
in
do
it.
it.
But like here, probably in Kentucky, just because I spend time, maybe Ohio, I don't know. We'll see what shows up there. Like for sure, Pennsylvania and Kentucky, I will set my sights on a buck and I will have a one-on-one war with him through the season.
Yeah.
And that'll be it. Again, if another buck comes through that is on my list of 4 and up, I'll probably kill him. But I've also passed several 4-year-olds up here, especially because I've got a chance at a Boone and Crockett deer in Pennsylvania with my bow, and it's not going to happen very much in my lifetime.
I want to bounce this back to something real quick, just because I think it's funny. We talked about the perceptions of size of deer. That's one part of it, certainly. But it's pretty eye-opening to realize how much perception there is just about deer behavior and activity.
Yeah.
And the more you like listen to people talking about, oh, these deer were rutting, or he was scraping, or he was doing this and that.
Yeah.
I think it's a similar percentage of accuracy. It's about 10% of like, oh yeah, that is actually what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
And I
it's
love
time
my dad, but I have to throw him under the bus as the guy that I've had to like watch it. I'm like, I don't know if that's really what he was doing, because it'll be September and he's like, oh, they're rutting. That's like our inside joke.
Yeah.
And love you, Dad.
It's
but-
time. It's time in woods. It's experience around that. And frankly, if you, and again, no knock to the guys who are shooting 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, but if you shoot the first 3 and under that you see, you don't spend enough time in the woods to probably see true deer behavior. Like I can remember growing up in Pennsylvania, like first buck I saw, I killed. So like when I finally got to experience what like rutting activity around a mature whitetail was, it was like, holy shit, like what is this?
Well,
like I've never experienced this in my life, because normally I shot the first buck I saw and I was out in the woods in October.
100%. It's in fairness, I think for guys my dad's age, they came up through a generation of like, if you see a racked buck, like that's what you're
killed
shooting.
it.
And
it wasn't that long ago,
no,
man.
it wasn't. It's hard to step back from that and say, okay, like I'm familiar enough with, I'm okay with just watching deer to the point where you can see a true observation to say, oh, like look at him doing this and doing that, and not just be so worked up about how do I kill this thing.
100%.
So fun too. You learn so much from that behavior witnessed firsthand, the sights and sounds and the interaction, the body language, posturing, all that stuff that you see. You don't get the enjoyment or the luxury of seeing that when you're pulling the trigger on the first one or two that walks by. Real quick story. I'll make this brief, but just an example of that is
go for it.
Last year I was walking in to a stand that I don't hunt very often, and it was the right time of the year, and I was slipping through the 17-acre project field, walking along a head high tall switchgrass stand, and I could hear bucks grunting and chasing out in the grasses next to me, and I was able to get past them and get up into that corner stand that I wanted, and an hour after sunrise, the party came by me, and it was 7 bucks tending one estrus doe, one hot doe, and the lead buck in the whole group was this deer we call Bully, and he's just I hate to use the word piece of crap, 8.4-year-old, giant bodied, just super aggressive deer, already broke off one side, and he was fending off 6 other bucks around him. And I got to watch that for 4 hours that morning, just sit there and soak it all in and watch that. And what you see and learn by those kinds of observations is irreplaceable.
Yep.
You can, to the point of like even calling to a deer,
Yeah.
and sounds that you may be afraid to make with your grunt call or a snort wheeze. And I saw it all that morning. And watch too about how lax and relaxed that doe was. She was just walking along and browsing and eating. She bedded down, and that Bully buck just was just expending calories and energy the whole morning, chasing off all these suitors. But it was really, really cool behavior.
I think the calling piece is one that probably from passing deer and being in the woods more and more, I've gotten really aggressive, particularly even at blind calling. Like I love blind calling. I feel like when I can kind of feel like the time is right, like I almost can picture what those vocalizations look like to be able to repeat, and it tends to be very successful.
Well, dude, one factor of that, I think, that's kind of deterred guys from getting aggressive with especially grunting is that there's only one grunt call on the market that I know of that can achieve like a real buck. All these other ones, like they
sound like a 2-year-old buck.
The thing goes flat, or that's that Primos buck roar. Do you have one of those too?
That's all I've ever used.
That thing rips, and that's what they sound
and
like.
I've got no fear of ripping at a buck. I think a lot of guys do because they're used to calling it 2-year-old bucks, and they rip at a buck or snort wheeze at a 2-year-old, and that deer turns and
we've all
flags
had
out,
them. Have you ever had like just a straight?
Tube.
The black tube, and there's been a couple others, and they all.
I'm sure there's other ones. Like I'm sure the extinguisher and those kind of things work too.
Nope, they don't.
They don't.
Nope, they all sound the same. That Primos buckboard, man, you can rip on it.
Well, I lost again. Short story.
And they don't
here.
sponsor us or anything. I've just had that
short
forever.
story here, Tom. I lost that in the CRP field in Kansas. And I ended up. I told my dad. In the middle of a CRP.
Going back.
Yeah, and I was like, "Listen, I'm going back in for that." He's like, "I get it." Like I was like, "No. Like
You
I've
don't
killed
get it.
like
You don't understand.
I've killed like 10 mature bucks with this call, and I found that damn thing in the middle of that CRP. Just tried to backtrack as best as possible, and I'm like, oh god, there's like, remember holding it up above and like running out of there.
It's a good piece of equipment.
It is, but it's. I think to Tom's point, if you've never heard those vocalizations in the woods, you'll never know how to make a call that's accurate to those deer.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You just won't.
Have you guys ever seen that clip? That it was on the Management Advantage. I filmed it back in, I want to say 2011 maybe.
Probably. We've watched
a deer
a lot
that was
of
on
it.
our farm called White Sox, and he was a 3-year-old on this particular day that I was filming him. I got 20 some minutes of the most incredible vocalizations that I've ever witnessed firsthand. And so the guys with the TMA, the management, they've recycled it a time or two and put it back out on social and on YouTube. And it's gotten millions. Well, I don't know. Last time I saw it, 1 million or 2 views, but people even commenting saying that's fake. There's no way that can be a deer making those sounds.
100%.
And I just had it was even an old tape camera, but I had a good Rode video mic over the top of it. And the ambient sounds that it was picking up around me were just like it was in your face, and it was the snort wheezing, but the growling and grunting and long staccato grunts that he was doing. Just incredible audio quality too. So
that's one of the.
If anybody hasn't seen that, you could.
Yeah, we'll drop a link.
It's really entertaining. Really entertaining.
We'll have to check that back. That's one of the awesome things I think about from that has come from filming hunts and also video trail cameras is you can really observe deer behavior like in their
a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say the one thing that I haven't heard, and I've used it because I'm just a sucker for it, is like the estrus call. Like I've never heard I've heard does grunt and stuff, but I've never heard a doe like make a like long estrus bleed or something.
I don't know that I have either.
Yeah, I haven't. I think I've had success in the past with just the old tip over can. Doing a replicated doe bleed. When the time's right, a doe bleed is going to get attention.
Yeah.
A lot of times it won't. So it's good to have it in your arsenal.
Yeah, I've used it. I just never heard it.
I'm like you though on the grunts. I'll grunt blind calling quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
It's a good standby, and I've pulled a lot of bucks into bow range with the grunt.
100%. Me too, man. Yeah, I love it. I think it's definitely. I think people wait even too long.
They
like
do.
that
In the
last
season,
10,
you mean?
that last 10 days or so of October, and I've even had success earlier than that.
Yeah,
but that
dude.
last 10 days of October, I mean that'll pull them in fast because they're all on high alert.
We rattled it and killed Corey's buck on the 25th of October.
100%.
I was rattling bucks left and right, dude. On the like the 23rd to the 25th this year was hot last year.
Yep. Yeah. It tends to be. That's the one that I kind of find.
Yeah.
To your point though, guys waiting too late. It's that ramping up stage, right? All that intense pre-rut activity when they're most susceptible and responsive to vocalizations. Once the does start coming into estrus and they're locked down with the doe, they could care less about the sound they hear on the next ridge. They're focused on what they found. So if you can catch them before they have found what they're looking for, or in between, of course, too.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, I think growing up, I've kind of always been that like, hey, first week in November or even first 2 weeks in November. And don't get me wrong. I mean, if you haven't experienced the November woods, like it's magical. But the more and more experience I have, the more critical that 22nd, 23rd to 28th of October is. Typically being that first doe getting into estrus and it just is so important. And I'm sure a lot of guys are under hunting that, knowing that they're probably taking their vacation first week in November, second week in November. But man, that is such a critical time frame for a mature buck to still be on somewhat of a pattern, but very, very active and responsive.
Good point.
What do you think of that red? What do you think of that red moon, Tom? Yay or nay?
I don't know, guys. I
just want to make sure we can still be friends after this.
I'm going to stay neutral on the moon stuff. I don't want to lose any friends.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, right? It just, the science behind it is not there. And so I'm not saying that there isn't some effect that science hasn't measured or we haven't looked
We're
at.
not going to judge you, Tom. Just perception. Like, have you tried to hunt it? Is it something that you've tried to apply to your strategy? Have you seen any difference?
I really haven't, to be honest with you. Now, if
We're
my
friends.
luck or my success has coincided with those phases, then I'd be the first one to tell you.
I mean, listen, the bottom line is where I'm kind of getting at it from the guys who, and there are people who have done observational studies, and I get that. It's the guys who say, listen, I've killed my buck on these dates. Like, it makes sense. And I'm like, cool. Have you hunted dates outside of that range? No. Well, of course you're going to kill your bucks there. You haven't hunted anything else.
Yeah, got to move moon guides.
Yeah, I mean, so like if you're only hunting on the red moon, when are you going to likely see the bucks? Only when you're hunting, which happens to be the red moon.
That's it, and I will give them fairness. There are guys that have killed way
100%.
bigger bucks than I have. We're going to talk to Ben Rising tomorrow, who I genuinely believe that he believes that red moon.
I know
stuff.
he does.
And he's killed some giant. He's got a full wall of giants. So.
Yep. Well, let him speak his piece. Me personally,
absolutely.
No.
I tend to be, again, from the distance that I have to my farm that I've got to drive, and being a weekend warrior because of work, I get to obviously set some vacation days and take time off for much of that now with my position. But it comes down to, if the time's right and my information that I'm gathering through cameras and direct observations is telling me it's time to get in there, and I'm seeing mature buck on their feet, that's obviously, I'm a big proponent too of saving some of our best stands, not going into this core of our property and overhunting a stand too soon into the season. The exception to that is maybe a north wind cold front in October.
Yeah.
And we can push the envelope a little bit there. But I really tend to think of, I'm on the periphery a lot of our really core areas that we stay out of, but they can't go from one part of the farm to the other without intercepting one of these stands. So it's it's a roll of the dice, and there's nothing about a mature buck that you can count on every day, but you can see patterns develop, and by your knowledge of food sources and where the does are at and where the bedding cover is, you can put together a pretty good strategy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think to the moon part of things, one of the reasons I don't like it is because it's such a general deer hunting strategy. Like, we talk a lot on this podcast about really seeing the benefit of digging into specifics of specific deer, specific locations, specific
weather.
Yeah, whatever that is. So as if to say, red moon, deer are on their feet when this red moon is this and that. I'm not a fan of those types of strategies. It's too general. Like, it's not, I can't apply that to a specific hunt or a specific deer.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that, ultimately to me, it's the property, it's the deer itself, and it's the weather. I mean, that's what I kind of hold to. And obviously it's time too. I mean, listen, you can't kill big buck if you're on the couch or you're at work. So, you have to hunt what you have to hunt.
I hate that phrase.
Sorry.
It's been abused. It's been abused in my camp.
It's true.
Can't kill him from the couch. Well, yeah, you also can't kill him if you're hunting the same stand every day. So.
You can't do that either.
Right.
You can't do
That's
that
right.
either. Well, Tom,
I'm in the camp too, guys, that I really don't believe 80% of the hunters out there give full respect to the abilities of a mature buck.
100%.
To understand when a person's been in after them and in the area, and the sense, that sixth sense that they have to applied pressure.
Yep.
I've seen some captive bucks and observed them off in a distance of deer, and I know you can't apply everything you see from a captive buck to a wild animal, but just they're on a different plane. They're on a different level, the way they respond to the sights and sounds around them. And I learned long ago that if there is such a thing, I probably hunt too cautiously everywhere all the time. Back when I was with Whitetail Properties, Sean Ferendorf was a field producer, and it still is, but he was carrying a camera and hunting with me on my farm. And we were after this deer we called a big giant 4-year-old 8 that I called bent brow. And we were about 7 days in on a 10-day, hunt time to try to get this deer. And I was still implementing my surgical inner here, different winds, different directions. And finally Sean said, man, you just, maybe we just need to just go for broke and go in after him. And I had to kind of convince myself, probably ought to do that instead of just hoping and playing the odds that I'm going to intercept him on the peripheral. Let's move in and get a little aggressive. In my mind, I was just worried about blowing him off the property.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we ended up killing him the next day.
Yeah.
But
there's something to that.
It's easy to go so far the other way that you can put yourself out of the game and out of the hunt. But to the opposite end of that, I think guys are a lot of guys are a lot bit careless in the way that they
100%.
approach their stand and go to and from, and how many times they hunt a stand, the noise they make while they're there. Those things are survival machines, and they're just so perceptive of any little difference that they come across.
I think the thing that I hate to admit, but it is definitely true. Like it's probably way more luck than any of us hunters like to admit. So you have to sometimes get aggressive and just hope you get lucky, because you're not going to beat a deer's nose. You're not going to beat his ability to survive in this woods. You have to get like intelligently aggressive and then hope you get lucky. And I hope you get it done within a time frame before he figures you out.
I mean, the majority of the mature bucks that I've killed have either been on first sits or hanging hunts.
Yeah.
It's just
or fluke things like, dogs chasing in or whatever.
That's just the way it is. It is. It's a lot of luck. I mean, there's strategy in it. You got to be in the right place at the right time, which is part luck and part strategy, because you actually went in and set up there. But I think that's critical. In fact, for a while there, I didn't do it as much last year, but, I wouldn't even hunt until latter part of October. I would just observationally watch, wait. And then it'd be like, okay, here's the day. And two of the biggest bucks I've killed in Pennsylvania, I did hanging hunts on that day, killed that deer, and that was it. Hunted one day, half a day in Pennsylvania. I think it definitely goes to show. Yeah, it goes to show on that mature buck level.
If you're hunting mature bucks on small properties, when I was younger, October 1st, I don't care what the weather, what the wind, 100%. I was hunting. I was sweating, walking to and from.
Yep.
And I'd say in the last 5 to 6 years, I've gotten really, really patient, even though I'm foregoing some of my hunting time, is unless I want to get in and shoot some does off of an easy to access food source. But as far as actually truly hunting and getting serious, I don't. I stay out and maybe an evening hunt especially on one of those north wind cold fronts that we talked about. But getting in the timber and sweating up and hoping to, I have found that the fresher that I leave my property towards the end of the month, I can get away with a lot more, and I can usually enjoy a lot more sightings and have 100%. A better opportunity at those bucks that are on their feet.
Yep, I agree. Well, listen, Tom, we appreciate you coming on today, man. We took up a big chunk of your morning and love talking deer. Would love to get you back on maybe once we get into the season and kind of hear about the property and how it's evolving for you and the family and kind of what you guys are seeing down there. And, man, as always, wealth of knowledge and, really enjoy kind of following what you've been doing on your place and, watching the development of even the base camp countryside and what you guys have been doing on that end from a real estate perspective. It's a hot market, and a lot of guys want to, wish to, and sometimes will never pull the trigger. But at the end of the day, life's pretty short, I
understand. And I'm sorry, I probably cost you guys 20 minutes with my technical.
Oh, you're good, man.
If I may, I don't want to drop a commercial plug.
No, hit it,
Base
please.
Camp Country. We're running a little velvet camera contest, velvet buck picture, basically a contest right now called Fuzz Buzz. And anybody, and we got some really awesome, like there's stuff on there from Ozonics and Domain Seed. There's a lot of cool prize packages in there that we're giving away to all you got to do. And it's not like we're drawing the biggest bucks. It's just like some random drawings. All you got to do to enter is post a picture of a velvet deer, and it doesn't have to be this year. It can be an old one, so you don't have to be worrying about showing guys your shooter bucks. But put a hashtag on there of Fuzz Buzz and tag Base Camp Country Real Estate on there. And my daughter, who's the lead administrator here in our office, counts those, and your name gets automatically entered for the drawing to win some of these cool prizes. They're all awesome hunting gear items too.
We'll have to drop our Indiana.
We get one entry for every picture, or one entry for
absolutely. Yeah, you can enter as many times as you want.
We have quite a few.
All right.
That's quite a few.
Yeah, we'll put our Indiana buck up on there.
Cool.
There you go. There you go.
Awesome, man.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on though. I appreciate the time.
We appreciate
Thank
it,
you,
Tom.
Tom.
Thanks, buddy.
All right.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
All
See you, man.
right. See ya.
Bye.
Sweet.
Good guy.
Man, it's funny. Well, first of all, I mean, we didn't go into it just because we were on such a roll with the habitat, but like I know Tom's got a very successful hunting background, and I know he's killed a lot of deer on that property. 160 acres as of just now with that 36-acre acquisition. Man, what a telltale sign of like, it's just you need the right piece of ground.
Yeah, I didn't really ask him if he's hunting other ground or if it's just his family farm.
Sounds like, I mean, he said he has some leases and stuff, but it sounds like the majority of his hunting is on that property.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you don't have to have 1,000 acres. You could have 160 if it's the right 160.
For sure.
You know, and we heard that with Jared Mills in his place. It's like, what, 200 or something?
Well, dude, it's not like a mystical thing. It's like it's a living animal. It's a goat that lives in the woods. They're either there or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, it's
you're
it's
not
not
gonna
a good
kill 'em.
hunting property.
Not going to kill them.
It's not hard.
Well, and I think that's where we kind of start thinking about, this Midwest trip. Like, obviously, we've hit something, and I love hearing Tom talk about Sullivan County being big
Yeah.
buck country. Like,
Yeah.
we've got a great lease there, and we've got a good chance. I do feel very confident about our Illinois grounds, but it's like, man, it's been a week now, and is it going to be 2 weeks? Like, at what point do those bucks start to filter into where we've got our stands and cameras at? Because right now they aren't.
Yeah.
And it just is. It's patience. It's just waiting. But now that you're in August, like everybody's biting at the bit. Everybody's thinking like, now's the time to get going.
Well, and it's observational too. Like I think we're kind of getting lucky that we're getting pictures on this Indiana piece. I think
Sure.
it's because it's a small tract of ground. In Illinois, like we know the bucks are there. We saw them. It's just there's so much habitat there that you have to be mindful of what deer are doing now versus when you're going to actually go hunt them. So to my statement earlier, if they're not there now, it doesn't mean it's not a great hunting property.
100%.
It just means they're not there right now.
But you do, I think, on the contrary to that, have to be very aware that if you have a property kind of like yours in Ohio, that if you're getting bucks now, the first week may be the best part of the entire deer season. And if you wait, per what we were just talking about, you could be shit out of luck for the rest of the season.
Fine. My tip to anybody who's hunting,
Just the tip?
and my tip to anybody who's hunting, properties that hold deer throughout the summer, and have ag in the surrounding areas or that you have access to hunt, green beans are where they're going to be at, or green alfalfa. And whatever green food source is left on the edges of fields and stuff, that is where they're going to be the first week.
Yeah. No, and I think, man, it's coming up. We've got 4 weeks till we're in the Dakotas, and the season's off and running at that point.
Like in all reality, like we need to put our packing list together and stuff. We need to start pulling some stuff together.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good list from last year.
Well, yeah, but we need to look at it and do something with it. The list exists, but we need to get it together.
Yep. We did,
Dude.
by chance.
Dude.
We just got some new camo in.
Yeah, I tried it all on while you were on the team meeting. It's awesome.
Yep. So we've got Predator camo this year. It's something that we've wore a lot in the past. Just a phenomenal pattern.
Super underrated company.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, great apparel. Like,
Awesome
again,
apparel.
good fits, great apparel. But the
Dude,
patterns
listen,
are
I'm gonna tell you right
man.
now. I've worn some Numa. I've worn some Nomad stuff.
Yep. Kuyu.
Kuyu makes good stuff too.
Mhm.
I don't have anything bad to say about Kuyu, but those first two, I don't have anything bad to say about them either. But in my opinion, the apparel doesn't stack up to Predator.
Mm-hmm. And I think the pattern is way better.
And that's a recent thing, like within the past couple of years, because Predator has been around
4 years or 5 years.
forever, and they had a bunch of crap stuff back
Yeah.
then.
'Cause
I
think the first year I was wearing Predator, I killed that buck. So that was 2016.
yeah, so maybe it was that year, maybe like 2015.
That was the first year I think I wore Predator.
They came out with a new line of apparel, and it's really nice stuff.
The pattern has been around for a long time. Brown Deception, Fall Gray. But I mean, it is a very scientific based pattern on eyesight of whitetail.
Yeah, so like Realtree and Mossy Oak are, you look at them and they look real, like a lot of sticks, a lot of
great
leaves,
to us
a lot of
as
leaves
humans.
up close, but far away you look like a brown blob. With Predator and some of these more open concept patterns, there's a lot of open space, like white space in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really helps when you get out to 20, 30 yards. It helps you break up.
I mean, I've had a lot of success with it, so excited to be using those guys' products this year. You'll probably see it in a bunch of our videos coming up too. So But yeah, that's it for this week. Episode 31 with Tom James, talking real estate, talking management, talking food plots of the Midwest. And we will catch you guys back here next week for the Hunter Podcast.
Take me